All right, this is Senate Government Operations. It's Friday, January 15th. And we today are going to look at CARES funding, the new CARES funding, and how it may affect the areas of jurisdiction that we deal with. Before we start, I want to again remind people that it's the committee that does the work here, the committee and the staff. And I would ask everybody who's in the meeting, other than committee members, and you can do as you please, committee members, is to keep your microphones on mute until we're asking you to testify. And if there are observers in the room that haven't been asked to testify, keep your mics on mute, and you may or may not have the ability to weigh in. If there's time, I will ask, just as if we were in the room in the State House. You can observe, but you aren't necessarily part of the meeting. And then, and I would also ask people, excuse me, not to use the chat function, except for Gail will be using it so that if anybody refers to documents or anything, she can refer to those links on the chat function. But I would ask people not to do it if we were in the committee rooms. We would not allow sidebar conversations, and so we are not going to allow them here either. So with that, what we're doing today, committee, before we start, I just want to check with Keisha, with Senator Rahm and Senator Clarkson. Senator Rahm, you might want to rename yourself there. We had talked about at the chair's meeting, Chris Bray brought up a suggestion that instead of scheduling 15-minute breaks like we do in the when we're in the session, that we might just be a little more flexible and not schedule it, and just when people start feeling the need for a break, that we just take a short break so that people can stand up and walk around and go up and down the stairs like Anthony wants to do, or whatever it is, but just take a few shorter 5-minute breaks. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, I didn't know if there had been previous guidance that we're supposed to take allotted breaks, but I'm open to whatever works for the group.
When we're in the State House, I usually try to schedule like a 15-minute break. Yeah. And the reason for that is so that people have time to meet with somebody or make a phone call or whatever it is they need to do. But I think here, because we're sitting so much, we need to do it maybe more often and not for such a long time. Senator Clarkson?
So taking Christopher Bray up on his suggestion, in Senate Economic Development, we're doing it once an hour. So once an hour, we take 10 minutes and we're back. And everybody's being really good about being back 10 minutes after 1 hour. So it makes it predictable, which, I mean, it's an idea and it's working well for Keisha. And
I think that what I'll do is try to not even schedule it, but just when we need it, if somebody just wants to flag and say, we need a break, because we don't want to schedule it so that it interrupt somebody who might be in the middle of a testimony or whatever. So, but we will do shorter, more frequent breaks.
Great.
Okay, thanks. So, and I apologize here for this coughing. I'm not sure what's going on, but anyway, what we're going to do is we need to look at what CARES funding there might be that affects the areas that are within our jurisdiction. So that would be EMS, towns and cities and towns, law enforcement, state employees. So anyway, we're going to hear from that here today, and I'm not sure who among our guests, if it's Steve or Doug or Tucker, who wants to start us off here? I guess nobody wants to.
I certainly could, but I also think Doug, maybe if you want to have the administration start off, I can give a big picture either way, whatever you want to do. I'm flexible.
That's
And-
fine. Senator
Madam Chair, it'll be exciting to hear Doug in his new role. Maybe he
Yes.
has a new costume.
All right, so I guess you're on, Doug.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Operational Officer for the Agency of Administration. So would you like me to start off with the lay of the land as far as CARES Act funding goes, or talk about the Consolidated Appropriations Act?
No, the CARES, well.
They do interplay, but I should start
Yeah.
from one or the other.
Whatever you think is best.
Okay, I'll start out talking about the Consolidated Appropriations Act because I honestly, unfortunately, my opinion is that for the moment, there's a lot less to talk about there. So for the Consolidated Appropriations Act, the first thing I tend to say around this is it wasn't a CARES 2.0. It wasn't another iteration of the CARES Act. And I say that because the uses of the funds, it's much more parsed out. It's much narrower. And, you know, there's also a lot less money in play. Now, there are significant amounts of money in play.
Does that
In the
mean
Consolidated
or-
Appropriation relieved some of our,
Okay.
sorry. It did give us an extension to the CARES Act, the CRF deadline through the end of the year, which gives us a little bit more flexibility in incurring new expenses. But it didn't put any additional funding into the coronavirus relief fund. So I think that's, you know, a good starting point is that, you know, before that bill and afterwards, we have the same balance in the coronavirus relief fund for Vermont. The things that it did do, emergency rental assistance, of course, is the big headline item. We think we're getting $200 million there. And that money, we've submitted the application the administration has submitted application for those funds. And we should be seeing them by law by the 27th, hopefully sooner. The caveats with that particular money is that it's going to be challenging figuring out exactly how that can be spent. It's very prescriptive language. So unlike the CARES Act, which was general money that could be used in a lot of different ways with federal restrictions, but still many, many different ways, the emergency rental assistance is for, you know, rental assistance, utility assistance. There might be
What
some
was this?
programs in AHS.
What was that word, second word you used? Rental assistance and what?
Arrearages, sorry. So if it also allows for prospective payment with income qualifications. That's one element that is in the emergency rental assistance is income qualifications. So it is much more targeted money than in the first round. So certainly we will be doing everything we can to work with the legislature to figure out how to best put that money out quickly. It has a very, very short timeline. So unused, unobligated funds have to be returned to the federal government in September. So it's a very short time frame. And I know that Commissioner Hanford has already been having a lot of discussions with Senate Appropriations about how we can work with the legislature to get the ball rolling on spending those monies. My personal opinion is that we don't know yet so we spent over $20 million. When I say we, I apologize, I mean the state of Vermont spent over $20 million last year on rental assistance of coronavirus relief funds. We don't know if a swap would be allowed at this point. Because of the prescriptive nature of the new federal language, it's kind of up in the air at this point. And my recommendation is that we don't spend any more CRF for the time being on rental assistance, because $200 million is going to be a challenge to figure out how to get out on the street. And we don't want to complicate it further by putting more CRF towards that purpose. So I think that there's a lot there. We're waiting on some Treasury guidance and, like I said, active conversations in Senate Appropriations about this particular bucket.
Senator Clarkson, did you have a question?
The Committee of Jurisdiction on this is, of course, Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And we are also working on this. We're going to have to be very creative if they allow us to. We can see our way to about 123 million being spent, but it's going to be a challenge, that other sort of 75, 80 million. So you're absolutely right. It's going to take a lot of creativity, but there are already a lot of ideas out there, and some of them you've submitted for waivers, I think, in request and thinking about how to be creative about it. But remember, this is one of our concerns after joint fiscal is sort of jurisdiction creep. It's
Right.
Committee of Jurisdiction is actually SED.
Right. Apologies. I wasn't involved in those discussions, so I was only aware of the Senate appropriations kind of, I guess, more informational session. And I think there was a legitimate question about the fastest and the most appropriate way to authorize these funds, because they could be treated as a new federal grant and authorized through the JFC process, or they could go through the Committee of Jurisdiction, Senate Economic Development. And again, not directly involved in those conversations. So I think unless there are further questions, that's the general lay of the land with rental assistance. A lot of money, but a very devoted use, and it's not going to creep into a lot of other areas. It's going to have to stay in a certain lane. The Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, in the scale of the numbers we've been dealing with in the pandemic, this is a smaller amount. It's 6.2 million. And 1/3 of that is allowable for the governor to use on public schools, and 2/3 has to be put towards non-public schools, private schools. I think.
Wait a minute,
You know,
will you clarify that 1/3 goes to public and 2/3 goes to private?
that is the federal structure of the law. Yes.
Are they nuts? I mean, you don't have to answer that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that one question the administration is interested in, I think, is can homeschools be considered, private schools? And because there has been a large population that had to convert to homeschooling during the pandemic, and there might be a way that this money could be used to help that population. So I think that's an area that the governor is interested in at least looking into. But it depends upon how the federal government really defines that private school section and how much discretion is there.
Oh my God. Anyway, okay.
The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund received about 126 million. And that is going directly to the State Agency of Education. 10% of that, so about 12 million, is eligible as a administrative holdback, and the rest would be flowing through to the LEAs. I'm honestly not close enough to education. I keep forgetting what the L in LEAs stands for, but maybe local education authorities. I'm not sure. I just know that it's in between the school districts and the Agency of Education. So I think that the nice messages on that is that it can be used in a broad number of ways for education, but again, it's very focused on education. So a good amount of discretion there. It might help solve some other problems in that area, but it isn't going to be able to be used in most of the areas that I believe are this committee's jurisdiction. The Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, $34 million, that's going directly to higher education institutions in Vermont. The state doesn't even have a direct role in that. I think it's good to know that money is flowing to them, and is quite flexible. They can use it for revenue replacement, for lost tuition and things like that. But directly from the federal government to the higher education institutions like the state colleges, like UVM.
They didn't do the same crazy thing there, but between public and private?
They did not. The federal government assigned direct amounts to different education institutions there.
Senator Polina?
So they also didn't make a distinction between, let's say, UVM and the state colleges?
Um,
In terms of
They did make a
percentage of the
distinction. So
money?
UVM has a discrete payment, and each of the state colleges
Had to walk
had a
away.
line item payment, I believe, Senator.
Okay.
I believe at this
Actually, I was
point we
going to
have
say on our
estimates.
website, we have college by college breakdowns. So we
Yes.
can go over that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The next two areas, vaccine assistance. At this point, we're still exploring. We got 5.6 million for vaccine assistance, and those funds have to be used directly related to vaccine prep, distribution, and tracking. I would say with that amount, I would anticipate at least that amount is going to be consumed and supporting vaccine activities. So even though that money technically could have been used for any CRF that we'd already dedicated to that purpose to backfill, there's just not a lot of opportunity there with that amount. So that's pretty discrete funding.
And can you just help me understand why I'm confused that I thought I heard 38 million? Was that including purchasing the vaccines or the value of the vaccines? We had heard 38 million early.
I'm sure you did, Senator, and that's because there were calculations done earlier on after the bill passed that assumed a state minimum that was not in the language in the bill. And we believe that was not intentional. We do believe there was an intention for Vermont to receive 38 million and for other states to receive more than they did because 5.6 million is not enough to support a statewide vaccine administration program. So I'm certain that there are conversations happening with the federal delegation, and I would anticipate that if new legislation passes in February related to some of the proposals the Biden administration is already putting forward, that I would hope that the small state thresholds would be part of that and kind of making an adjustment there. For the moment, though, we only have the current law, and the CDC did publish these amounts, and 5.6 is the amount that the CDC has said that Vermont will get.
Okay, I had been thinking we could like pay everyone $50 and still have 20 million to sort of administer it, but that's a big difference. Thanks.
There were two areas, Senator, where there was a big difference. That and the next one, Public Health and Social Services Emergency Fund, which I believe that fund would have had, especially with EMTs, with local governments, there could have been a lot more overlap with your committee's jurisdiction there. That we had anticipated initially 179 million. Now CDC has let us know we're only getting 35.9 million because of that small state cap. So in the Consolidated Appropriations Act, that's where we lost the most opportunity, because the 179 million, that would have been a very complex conversation between the legislature and the administration, figuring out, okay, can we take some of this and put it against CARES Act we already spent in these public health sectors? What are the current needs? But with 35.9 million to support testing and tracing, I would anticipate that a lot more of that is going to be consumed in the direct needs of AHS, but I would defer to them on that. But just losing 144 million there from the calculation difference from the lack of a small state cap was a very big hit to Vermont. So that fund in particular, I would say that would have been the biggest area that I think of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And I am not directly involved in the planning of how to spend that 35 million or where the needs are with that. But I would say that probably has the most nexus to your committee, Madam Chair. The next elements are the remaining 5 elements that I'm going to call out are all, they're more like additions to other funding streams. So rural transit funding got 26.7 million. That's going through the Agency of Transportation most likely. But that's just putting more money into that rural transportation structure. Child Care Development Block Grant got 12.6 million, likely going through the Agency of Human Services. That CDBG grant previously had gone through there. State highway funding received 50.4 million, also going through AOT. Grants and aids for airports got 3.9 million. And then there's a $1 million drinking water, low-income drinking water and wastewater emergency assistance program. And as far as monies that go directly through the state, with the exception of the one thing I didn't list as well was the UI program and the changes there, the extension and the additional $300 payments. There wasn't anything else I'm aware of that goes directly through the state of Vermont from the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So to sum up, it really didn't put a lot of discretionary money on the table for the state of Vermont, unfortunately.
So on those amounts you gave us for like rural transit and child care development and stuff, is that money in addition to what we normally, or is?
Yes, Senator, I believe that is above the pre-existing allocations.
And would you just talk a little bit about the UI? I didn't quite get that there's an initial $300. I guess this isn't our area really, but it would be nice to understand it while we're here.
I would have to apologize there, Madam Chair. I am aware of the additional $300 payment, and I'm aware of an extension of the federal match, but I am not the best person on those details. I kind of moved away from that and allowed Commissioner Harrington to be the lead on that.
Maybe Senator Clarkson has an answer.
Yeah, it is we remember we initially had a $600 payment that went with whatever you got on UI, and now it's been reduced to $300, and it is only for 11 weeks. So it's $300 additional dollars on top of your UI check, but it's, I believe, only for 11 weeks. And Steve Klein can correct me if I'm wrong.
And that covers PUA also?
That I have forgot. I don't remember. I believe so, but we'll double check. Okay. I can't remember. Keisha, can you remember? I can't. Does it? I think it does, but and Steve, are you on? I thought you were on. Oh no.
Sorry. Yes, you're right. Yes,
What?
you're right. Basically,
It does cover PUA?
Yeah.
I'm saying it's correct what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. The problem is she didn't know what she was saying, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I'm glad just keep it up, Klein. That's a good idea.
Okay, thanks. I didn't mean to get into the weeds there, but just in case I'm sure we'll all get questions.
No, that's an important one for us to know because it's one of the few things directly for individuals who are hurting the most right now.
Okay. All right. Doug, do you want to continue here?
So I would say at this point,
I guess Senator Rahm has a question.
Okay.
I guess it's kind of a general question, but I'm not trying to ask you to be a, fortune teller or anything, but how might we assess if some of these things would change with a new administration as we go would be helpful, or if you think they're static? Like I'm just trying to understand, is this it, or could this change with the president-elect's new proposal before we get the money in?
So the things that I've heard at this point, Senator, are that there's a lot of states banding together, financial officers banding together to try to request more discretion on the rental assistance money. So I think that the Biden administration is likely to be sympathetic to that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more discretion on how that rental assistance money can be used. Maybe not increasing the amount, but maybe increasing the ways it could be spent so that Vermont would have an easier time figuring out how to spend that $200 million, probably keeping it in the rental and housing kind of lane. So I think it all still probably fall within economic development. The Emergency Education Relief Fund, I know that a lot of, there is discussion about a great amount of additional money towards education. in some of the Biden proposals. So the education related items, I don't think much will change in those, but we'll probably see supplementals and additional amounts to those education sections. I would think that the vaccine and the testing and tracing, I think that it's more likely than not that that small state threshold will be adjusted so that we would get another 33 million for vaccines and another 144 for public health for testing and tracing. So I think it's more likely than not that those amounts will come back on the table. They already had a broad amount of discretion within those uses. So I don't think that the rules around them will change. I just think we might get a supplemental payment to those funds. The last 5 elements, the direct funding for AOT and other places, I doubt that there will be any action there. And on as far as UI goes, with the $1,400 payments being on the table, I don't imagine they would do the $1,400 payments and a UI fix, and an additional. They might do an extension in the UI sector.
What's the $1,400 payment?
Sorry. So initially, there was a lot of talk about the U.S. Treasury ended up doing the direct payment of $600 per person, and then an amount with dependents directly to every taxpayer in America. And there was debate over whether that should be $600 or $2,000. And now the Biden administration is proposing $1,400. So basically getting people up to that $2,000 to every taxpayer. And that's going to consume a large amount of the $2 trillion that they're talking about in the package. But I think 350 billion, and this is always dangerous to try to rattle off numbers like this. I'm almost bound to be wrong at one point, but I think 350 billion was dedicated towards education out of that 2 trillion. And those $1,400 payments would consume a large chunk of the remaining 1.65 trillion.
I have to say, I think I'm sounding like an old conservative here, but I would rather see that money a little more focused. I do not think that I want to see Jeff Bezos getting another $1,400 check.
It's based on your income.
Yes,
What do you
Senator, there
mean?
is an income phase out on those.
Because the first one wasn't, was it?
It was.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
The 2,000?
Yes.
So
And
what's,
this one is too.
what is the income limit?
I think it's 75,000 is what I remember.
It is 75 for one and 150 for a couple. The first one had a higher cap.
If you're above that, you don't get it?
Correct.
But I would agree with you, Jeanette. I would agree with you. I think that the UI payments are much more targeted to a population in much greater need. And if you're earning money, it's a very broad brush stroke, the $2,000, even with the income cap on it. I don't disagree. Sorry, Brian, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I was just going to add that it's not like a switch that's thrown at 75 or 150. There's a graduated level of payment as you go further up.
I guess I didn't know that. Shows you where my income is.
So that's all I have on the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Unless there are other questions, happy to attempt to field any other questions.
But there really is nothing in here for municipalities or local government or anything like that where we're in desperate straits.
That is my current assessment, Madam Chair. Yes.
Okay.
But Jeanette, that's what was so exciting about the Biden-Harris proposal last night, is that there will be a lot more for states and municipalities.
Yes.
But it has to, of course, pass Congress, and we don't know when it's going to hit us.
Yeah. Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doug, I also didn't hear anything about elections or military.
No, Senator, I am not aware of anything that would help us in that regard that was specifically called out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oh, I think Secretary Condos yesterday said, or the other day, whenever he was with us, that there was nothing for elections, and that even the elections money that there was all tied to the federal elections. And because we piggyback, we could use
Did
it.
say
but,
that. Yep.
yeah. And there won't be a federal election again for 2 years. Right?
Correct.
All right.
All right. So now, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to move into kind of a status report on what I know of the CRF at this point.
Yep, that would be great. Does anybody have any more questions or anything first before we move? Okay.
So as the committee is probably aware, the original deadline up until 2 days before it was December 30th, 2020 for the CARES Act. We did receive an extension on December 28th, but most of the appropriations or JFC allocations and the spending plans by the administration or grant programs had all been designed to expend that money by December 30th. So when I checked actuals in late December, we had already spent out of the bank over $1 billion of the 1.25 billion. And the other $250 million, the vast majority of that was all tied up in, it was obligated, but waiting on invoices. I think at this point, we did receive the extension, and we had established a process to revert that money and put it against a certain set of priorities, put it against payroll to make sure that we didn't have to return anything to the federal government, because we have a large amount of eligible payroll in state government that we did not put CARES Act money against. So that would allow us to expend the remainder that didn't make it out into the community. And then that would have had the consequence of allowing us to have general fund to talk about in the BAA. But with the extension, after consultation with JFO, essentially with the extension, unless a program had a very specific end date in state law, those appropriations stood. So programs that could continue to expend past December 30th have been continuing to expend. We've had a number of programs that have reconciled and closed out, but I would say we have over 100 CARES Act programs in Vermont, and a good portion of them are still active and either in the phases of final reconciliation or are still helping Vermonters. So the dollar amounts that we're talking about with freed up CARES Act money at this point are dramatically lower than expected, and I think that all told, we're looking at, a handful of millions as opposed to the numbers we were expecting when we were talking about it in December and November and December about our final reconciliation. So
But those programs will continue to benefit Vermonters and Vermont businesses and stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
One example is the Public Service Department's utility arrearages program. That had a couple of people that still needed assistance right around early January, a couple applications that still had to be processed, and that let us close that loop. Probably not the best example, because now we could have tried to repurpose that money for the rental assistance, but yes, I think the other example is the education sector. There had been discussion about reverting money from that because the schools couldn't find enough uses before December 30th in order to fully expend the grants that they had signed up for. And that was because of a timing issue, because the HVAC installers were flat out and just not able to put any more systems in. And so at this point, there is still some money there, but it could still be used towards the purpose of making our schools safer during the pandemic. So at that point, none of that money has been reverted and is still sitting with the program under the legislatively authorized purpose. So as far as amounts on the bottom line right now, the last time I looked, we only had about 3.5 million on the bottom line in the coronavirus relief fund. And the discussion that I know Commissioner Gresham is more the point on is the administration does have some proposed uses for if money is to revert over the next month or two as programs close out, as we reach the natural end of the need, what that money would then be put towards.
So as we go forward here, and there's that 3.5 and potentially a little bit more, what is our role in suggesting to you uses for that money? I mean, I know that we have Drew Hazelton with us here today, and EMS, I think, system is dreadfully in need of money, and cities and towns. So what is our role as we go forward in the area in suggesting to you uses for that remaining money?
So I would say, Madam Chair, that as Senator Clarkson pointed out, the JFC process of utilizing that money and move it around has ended with the beginning of the new session. And that was where the administration proposed reallocations. At this point, reallocations of CARES Act, first opportunity, I believe, is likely in the BAA. And I know that the administration intends to talk about how we approach remaining CRF funds and future reversions in the Budget Adjustment Act. So I think that that's the appropriate vehicle to house the most immediate CRF related needs. I think that it's going to be difficult because we do have such a small amount of CRF left. And as I said, those reversions we're anticipating, none of them are going to be very large. So it's not going to be able to meet very many needs, the remaining CRF process.
And the needs, some of the needs are still quite large, like the rental assistance piece, which, you know, that we're clearly going to continue to face large need. So
I didn't get that. If you just said that the rental assistance program is going to face large needs, but we don't know how to spend 200 million for rental assistance.
No, in the amount that we had to spend, you know, in the first bit in the CRF piece, it's the new stimulus one that is the challenge, not the former one. And the FEMA money that they found, Doug, you could maybe explain that some of this FEMA money is any of the FEMA. So that's a question for this committee, which is any of the FEMA money that they're using to kind of juggle the rental assistance piece, is that, and maybe liberate some of that or replace it, is any of that available for areas in our jurisdiction, given that we deal with so much of the emergency community?
So before you answer that, can I throw another one on there? If the rental assistance program is from before is lacking in funds, and the new rental assistance program is eligible, I thought Doug said, for arrears, why don't we just use it to fill that gap for those arrears?
We're hoping we will be able to, but there's this other hope that Doug can maybe explain better than I, that FEMA money, which we hadn't fully understood we could use in this capacity, is being used to also juggle that.
I get that. I just am really concerned that we're spending FEMA money that and maybe I'm wrong here, that could be used in other instances to fill rental assistance when we're then going to struggle to use 200 million for rental assistance because it's too much. And why don't we instead use that FEMA money someplace else and just backfill the arrearages? Am I
Yeah,
entirely?
I get it. I get what you're asking. Doug, do you have an answer for that?
So what I would say related to the FEMA money is that right now we have recently, with total FEMA claims for the state of Vermont, for medical providers, for municipalities, for all FEMA claims in Vermont, we're right around $100 million of claims to FEMA. Now they would reimburse a maximum of 75 million of that. And we're working through that. We're adjudicating and we're figuring out, okay, of that 100 million, exactly how much are they going to reimburse the state of Vermont? One thing with FEMA money, I would say, is that of all of the different funding sources, FEMA is the most onerous and it is the most specific. So when we get FEMA money for a particular program, we may be able to offset some other funding that we had parked there. Like if we had CRF supporting a program, we get FEMA. Technically, we need to be paying for that program with those FEMA dollars. And then the general fund or the CRF or whatever else was funding that program could be moved away to another use. But FEMA money has to be spent directly on what you got the claim reimbursement for. And then that is part of our approach, is that over the next year, we are going to be seeing, we've tried to anticipate how much of the FEMA claims will actually be reimbursed. And we're trying to keep enough CRF on hand to reimburse that in the budget. And with like the healthcare provider program had a section where they were covering applicants' CRF match, because CRF can be used to match against FEMA, whereas other federal funds cannot. Otherwise, we would have to use state funds to match against those FEMA reimbursements, those FEMA claims. So I think specifically with the FEMA payments coming in, the claims for these housing programs, I think that there is some opportunity there for those FEMA to free up CRF, but that is also tempered by the fact that we got an extension of CRF. And CRF is the only source we can use to match FEMA other than a state dollar. Yeah. So that's going to increase the pressure on CRF dollars as well, because we have ongoing pandemic activities. And I, for one, want to make sure we keep the general fund burden on FEMA match as low as possible. So that's something we're also having to juggle, is keeping CRF on hand to match against FEMA claims.
And are we max? Oh.
Yes, Senator Clarkson.
Are we maxing, the with, I'm cognizant that Drew Hazelton is on the phone with us. Are we ensuring that all our members of the emergency community are all their additional expenses are being maxed and used fully in this FEMA match situation?
I would say yes, Senator, we are. Before I transitioned into the role, Brad Furland issued a memo saying for all of our CRF programs, if you are a FEMA eligible entity, you have to apply to FEMA first. And so with the municipalities, that was the case. And we created a kind of side-by-side process where they could apply to both places, but they would get the FEMA award before the CRF award wherever possible. And I think by doing that, we were able to stretch the CRF dollars, and we had a good amount of municipal applications to FEMA. And one thing I would say about the towns is that they're experienced at applying to FEMA, and their claims went more smoothly than a lot of the other claims. So that was a win-win for the state, I think, and that with that approach. There are also a lot of moving potentialities with FEMA, where the Biden administration could choose to reduce the match percentage to 10%. Theoretically, the president, not the governor, can reduce the match to 0. That is within the president's authority to do. So, and Vermont has already crossed the threshold at which you could go from 25 to 10, but that is not something we can count on. That is only something that can come from the federal government. So not something we can plan on.
Well, that was totally uplifting. Thank you. All right. Doug, do you have more to tell us?
Christmas is in another 340 days.
I apologize, Madam Chair. That is the ground I had planned to cover. I will stay around to, answer any additional questions that come up. But I think that I just wanted to say to the committee that the legislature in last session did an amazing job of working through and getting the money out the door. I hear all the time from peers and from different groups I work with that Vermont was better than just about any other state in getting the money out there to help Vermonters. So I just wanted to express gratitude for this committee and for the other committees I work with that I think we did an amazing job getting the money out the door to the community, helping Vermonters. And that's one reason why this extension, when the CRF was extended, it didn't necessarily help us as much as it helped a lot of other states. What we need is another vehicle to help us get through 2021, because we already did a great job in trying to make 2020 better for Vermonters. But that is what I had for today, Madam Chair.
Senator Rahm, did you have a question? And then Senator Collmore, I saw you had.
It was more, I think, for the committee maybe than Doug. And I appreciate Gail putting the article in the chat about Biden's stimulus plan update from yesterday. Because I think we're going to have to keep unpacking this, but I just want to make sure as a new member of GovOps that I understand what is within our purview and what isn't. So for example, just with vaccine rollout, would we have anything, would we have any purview over that? That's all healthcare, health and welfare. Is that correct?
I believe so. What we have oversight on is municipal, EMS, law enforcement, the military, local government, and then the structure of government itself. Mm-hmm. So if the rollout affected the structure of the government, then we might have on the other hand, what I would say is that because we're the Government Operations Committee, we can do anything we want. I mean, within reason, we can weigh in on many, many things because we are government operations. And just like yesterday, when we sent the note about the vaccine rollout to the encouraging the administration to look closely at our corrections facilities and those who are incarcerated and work in them. So while we have certain areas, we often weigh in on other areas. And I think that, and sometimes other committees will ask us to weigh in on things or to take things over, which is what happened with marijuana dispensaries. Mm-hmm. That certainly isn't our concern, but health and welfare didn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. So I think that within reason, we can weigh in on anything, and we can certainly make recommendations to other committees if we have. Yeah. Okay. Does that answer it at all?
It does. And I mean, I guess in specific, what I've been thinking about is the role of EMS in vaccination, like mobile vaccination, essentially. So I'm just sort of playing that out of my mind, but I'm just feeling like EMS, however EMS interacts with vaccine rollout or the CARES money is of interest to me. And I'm trying to understand that better.
Yep. Okay. Senator Collmore?
Actually, I didn't have a question, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank Doug for ending on a high note. with the nice compliment, although it seems somewhat, and not on his part, backhanded, because we were so efficient that we've now found ourselves behind the 8 ball again. But I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Although those Vermonters for whom we got the money out early and got it off fast are probably happy that we were able to do that, because it did help them faster than it might have. Okay, anything else? Doug, thank you so much for that. It was, I'm sorry I kind of facetiously called it uplifting, but it isn't your fault. So we don't ever believe in shooting the messenger here. But yes, Senator Clarkson.
So I have a question for Doug before he departs, which is, how are you enjoying your new job? And 2, what are you responsible for? I'm actually not clear what the Deputy Secretary of Administration is responsible for.
So Senator, I would say I got the, Kristen Klauser is the Deputy Secretary of Administration. I got the Chief Operational Officer.
Oh, that's right. You're Chief Operator, right?
Which is actually somewhat vaguer. And in the long run, I think I look forward to working with this committee much more, because it would make sense that the Chief Operational Officer would have a lot of shared interests with the Government Operations Committee of the Senate. So in the long run, I intend to be involved from an oversight role on a majority of the state's large IT projects, particularly if they cross multiple agencies, particularly when they affect a lot of processes. I've already, and I think, Senator, you know my background a bit, so you, I don't know if the other.
I've seen you in every capacity.
I did spend some time as project manager, project director, and I was working on the property management system that Director Jill Remick is rolling out right now with the towns. And that is honestly the grand list software. That is a big deal from a municipal operations perspective. So I'm still staying connected to those projects at a statewide perspective. For the short term, obviously, I'm focused heavily on Coronavirus Relief Fund, and now how any additional funding sources at the federal level will play into pandemic relief, and helping to make sure we're evaluating the risk on those different spending opportunities and just operationalizing, getting the money out the door, helping stand those grant programs up. Just because of the timeline with coronavirus relief, we had to get those programs stood up much, much faster than is traditional. And I think we're going to have the same thing happen in 2021, where if we get a new package from the Biden administration, the legislature and the governor are going to need to work together to figure out what they want to do. And that's less my role now. But I will get involved with helping to stand that up and make that a reality, and getting those programs going as quickly as possible.
Yes, Senator Clarkson.
So you just said that something that did you begin that work that Jill Remick's now overseeing, but maybe this committee would be appropriate for this committee to get an update on that work, given.
Yeah, we will. Okay. Yep.
Yes, I began that
I thought
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So we'll schedule that and have you or Jill and the League of Cities and Towns kind of come in on the same day to talk about.
Great.
So thank you, Doug. And I don't know if you're going to stay with us or not, but we certainly are welcoming you to stay with us in case things come up. So
thank you, Madam Chair. I'll stay with the committee while you're still on this subject.
Thank you. So we'll jump to Steve.
Okay. And do you want to take a few minute break first? Or you want to just go right into it?
Is everybody ready to stand up and do 3 jumping jacks and then come back? Okay, we'll take a break. So Gail, if you want. I hear we're supposed to get a huge snowstorm.
Really?
So they were talking about it in judiciary this morning. I haven't paid attention, but Alice Nitka said that she thought we're supposed to get about 1.5 feet.
No, I didn't hear
I
that.
think,
You'll see my
I think
document.
that's just for the north.
Oh, I don't know.
Channel 5 said last night the next snow we're going to get is like a week from today.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Well, Sears said they didn't have any left on the ground in Bennington.
We're very little.
We have about 4 or 5 inches left on the ground.
Yeah, we have snow. We have enough to go cross-country skiing.
The forecast up here is snow starting at 2 a.m. It looks like. But I didn't know, so thank you for telling me
Yeah,
that.
you're up north and you're supposed to get snow.
I'm going on a one-horse sleigh ride tomorrow
Oh,
Oh, lovely.
Oh,
up in Brownington.
how
Are-
fun.
oh, I
you-
know that place.
Do you?
I'm trying to think of why I know it.
What's the name of it, Gail?
I don't know. It's been arranged by my husband.
But where is it?
Brownington?
Yeah.
It's a
I don't
small
even know
family-run farm, I guess.
So I think it was somebody that I worked with on the community development board maybe years ago that did it. It just rings a bell.
I have to share a little bit of our committee room from 2020.
Oh, look, it looks so happy.
Yeah.
I can't see anything. All I
It's
see
a
is
cyclamen. Well, we could go back on.
yeah, all I can
It's
see is
beautiful.
what I don't know what you see.
A cyclamen. She's going to show you.
Oh,
It's
nice.
gorgeous. It's our cyclamen.
Senator
be-
Brown, that always sat on the middle of our table.
I think it's one of the ones from my parents,
Yes.
who are
Oh.
now both dead. They gave it and now they're both no longer with us.
Well, there they are.
But their plant lives on. Yay. It's great. Thank you, Gail, for taking such good care of it.
Yes.
You
The
are
other
wrong.
one I have is blooming also, but not as beautifully as that.
So thank you, Steve, for suggesting that because I went outside for a while and breathed real air. And it
And it's
wonderful.
nice. It's nice today.
So,
Oh, I can't, my video is disabled, so I have to,
you what?
my video seems to be, now I'm, okay, good. So, yeah.
There
all
you
right,
are.
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. So do you want to?
So I want to start with that. So bottom line is, we haven't rehearsed, Doug and I didn't rehearse this. I mean, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of similarities, but we'll each have slightly different perspectives. It's a little bit like the world we're in now is that old story about, describing a blind man describing a camel or whatever the animal is, because we're all looking at this thing from our own perspective. And it is an incredibly changing person. In some ways, being in the Senate, changing piece is being the Senate will be better because you're going to have, when you get the appropriations bill and things, it's going to be unfolding over the whole session and you're going to be going second. So I think you may have more resources than the House does, but it'll be every answer has, even in the, you'll see the answers are just changing day to day. And so what I was going to do first was go over this thing that's called the issue brief. I think I sent it to Gail. It's is that something you can pull up? It's the one that's
Yeah, we
One of
can
the
look
first-
at it on our,
yeah, I can also, yeah, let's see if it gets
no, it's okay. It's right here.
okay.
Senator White, would you prefer that the committee members bring it up on their own or that I share the screen?
I would say that's up to the committee members. What do you all think? What do you want?
I have it up already. Just FYI, it says 2011, not 2021.
Oh, it does. Where does it say 2011? Yes, it should be 2021. That's a good catch. Yes, thank you. Well, you do have the right document.
Yeah, it is right there, 2011. Well,
Oh, my God.
there is-
Okay.
there is a kind of, yeah.
Okay, so should we just start right in on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing is, other than the date, which I got to clean up, it's like the earlier funding. It's, this is very similar. There's a lot we don't know because the bill just passed in, we got the bill at the end of December, and we had a big revision on January 11th, which Doug already talked about what our expectations on money for testing, and went way down and things like that. The second thing is that this bill was coupled with the federal budget for FY21. So, and that also was sort of later than normal. So one of the things that the agencies are probably gonna have to do is not just look at the relief bill, but look at all the changes that are in the federal budget. And there are some links at the bottom of this issue brief you can click on to start looking at that. And you can see in different areas where it's of interest to you what's in there. The other thing is that the key thing, as Doug mentioned, extended the time for using CRF funds till December 31, 2021. And, we sort of think, and this is older, I think that the number is still, their money could be impacted by the extension. We have here 10 to 30. The administration may be slightly lower. Part of one of the things that's still at issue, and Doug and I haven't really coordinated on this, but it's becoming an issue. Ledge Council is somewhat concerned about this, that there's a fair amount of money that's still in agencies. For example, an AOE has probably 14 million. There's about 7 million in the broadband area. And all this money has not been it's not in the returned, has not been returned to the CRF fund. It's within those appropriations. Now, what I think the question is, all that we did was we said this money can be used for expenses up to December 30th. It can be used for COVID-related expenses, which still is the case, and has to be outside of the budget that was passed a year ago. The issue now is, can they continue spending that money for expenses beyond December 31st? And the answer is, the federal government says yes. You have a whole year to spend it. But given we passed all of this stuff with conditions about spending by December 30th, do we need to pass additional language saying, yeah, you've got your money in your line, but we need to give you some additional authority to spend it? And that's sort of an area where there's discussions going on, and it's gray. And I think that the Ledge Council would say we should probably add language in different places saying, and notwithstanding the other laws we passed before, yes, you can continue to spend because the federal law has changed. Or it's really an issue in some cases, like in broadband, where they put distinct language in there that said any expenses beyond December 30th, or as of December 20th, any unspent money has to be returned to the CRF fund. That we know they have 7.9 million. So we're going to have to notwithstand that law and change it. In education, we'll talk about this in a minute.
Can I just ask a question first? Can I ask a question? You said that there's some conversation in Ledge Council about that, and we might need to, we might need to add language in different places.
Well,
Can it be added in one place to cover everything?
Well, no, and that's the dilemma, because, and this is one of the dilemmas we have in this area where, as you know, when we did the CRF spending, we did it in a lot of different bills in a lot of different sections. And so the problem is different in different places. So we're, I don't want to, I guess I would just say, these are good questions. And the answer is, we don't know yet how we're going to handle it. It's sort of it's just a problem that's starting to unfold. And it's, we had another example where today I got a call from a small facility in Rutland that got money from Housing Conservation Board, but they have more work they could do with the money, but it's January. And so Housing Conservation Board wrote them and said, you cannot spend the money because it's now January. Well, maybe Housing Conservation, we need to give authority for these groups to, spend. So these are the things that you probably will be called in to deal with.
Okay, so Senator Rahm has a question.
My regional planning commission mentioned a concern about the local government expense reimbursement program. Is that one of these as well? Is that a CARES Act thing or something? Where does that fall?
So, and I, if Doug wants to jump in, I think the same issue is going to be there, but Doug, you might want to, I haven't really heard from them, so.
I would say that the local government expense reimbursement program initially was allocated 12.6 million. I believe that a little over 10 million of grants were issued, and a portion, 1.6 million or so, was reverted. So that was reverted and allocated and spent in other places during the JFC process. And that was all based on expenses claimed up to 10 million. And I know that the auditing process in that program was very rigorous. So that $10 million of grants was fully justified for 2020 activity. And at this point, there's no money left in that program to continue forward, even if authorization was granted to issue new grants for 2021 activity.
Can I forward you this email? Because I feel like the head of CCRPC would know what he's asking, but maybe I'm saying it incorrectly, but he wanted that extended.
Of course, Senator.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I guess the overall theme is this whole thing is complicated, confusing, and it's gonna be messy. And we're just gonna be finding our way. And the really fascinating thing about it is it was bad last time where the bill passed, and then in March, and then we had the regulations coming out for up until probably November and changing. And every time it changed, it would affect us. Well, this time the bill passed under the Trump administration. The Biden administration is going to have probably a different take on the guidance on this. And then as Doug mentioned, the new bill that's being talked about could change things too. They could come in there and change the specific the way we can use the render assistance money. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So it's a constantly changing world. It's going to be, I was talking with someone today, we may end up doing several budget adjustments, like maybe 2 or 3 or more. There's one quick bill coming out in the Senate to address some of these little issues that are being called technical issues. They're working with Senator Sirotkin. They're working with a lot of senators, because there's a lot of the broadband issue is in there. It's food issues. So it's affecting a lot of committees. They're trying to capture some of these things and clarify them. But I have a feeling that'll happen again and again through the next few months. The next thing I was going to say, and these are just sort of general overview statements, we'll get to specifics in a minute. The bill's impact on Vermont is going to be, and this is really important from the point of, the first bill really had about a $5 billion impact on the state, of which 1.25 was the CRF funds. This one, I think it's in the neighborhood of $2 to $2.5 billion impact, because that includes everything from the federally administered PPP programs to the federal SBA programs, to the money that went out to individuals and in UI, and then money going out on checks. And the check cap is around 85,000. I think it does trigger off at some place around that. So all of this money is, I think, hitting the economy. And so and we'll talk about that in a minute, but the amount of money that the state has to deal with is somewhere in the neighborhood of 650 million and maybe less, because as Doug pointed out, and we'll go into this in a minute, the federal, the higher ed world, they allocated that money down to every institute of higher education. So we have a list on our website, which does show, I probably should send it to you. You can all look at your favorite school and see how much they got. It's down to the smallest amount went to, I think it's CIT in Brattleboro, which they got, I think it's 10 or 15,000 or something of that nature. So they were not a big winner, but the money, I think the state colleges got about 12 million, the UVM got about 10 million, and all the schools got different amounts. There's not a lot of money to law school, but anyway, so that's, we can get into that. So then there are areas where, and some of the, so anyway, so the money, those monies are allocated, and the education is another one, but rental assistance is the area where the biggest problem is occurring right now, because we got 200 million. We got, which is, if you think about Vermont and the CRF money, Vermont got $2,000 per capita. And in New York, California, Texas got $389 per capita because of the small state minimum. So basically we got 5 times what these big states got per person. So that's a lot of money. And we like it. It's good for us. It made it easier to deal with our issues than those states have. And so the renter assistance used the same formula as the CRF fund. So while we got $200 million, and I haven't figured out the per capita amount, proportionally, those big states probably got, a lot less. Their share is way down. So we are in a situation where one of the things being proposed for the first bill out of the chute, the one the Senate Appropriations is working on today, is to give $50 million to the Department of Housing to start getting that money out and meeting their needs. And that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but it's a quarter of what we got. And so one of the big problems is anything we don't spend by September 30th, anything we don't obligate by September 30th will be returned to the feds. So there's going to be a lot of pushing to get this out quickly and try to be creative about how we use it.
Steve, can I ask you the question that I asked earlier, and maybe I didn't ask it right, but if we got $100 in the first rental assistance program, and we needed $150,
right?
And now we are getting $200, but we only need $150. Why can't we put $50 of what we can't? I think Allison said we can spend 173 million, but the other 37 million is going to be
123.
Well, okay, but so the other amount. So why can't, if it can apply to arrearages, why can't we just backfill? I don't get that.
So that's a really good question, and this is the area where we're and this happened before in housing related stuff. So what we tried to do, you know, a lot of this is depending on how much risk we're willing to take, because you know you're dealing with the new rental housing, and he has very strict income limits on it, and the new old CRF money did not. But you're right. I mean, the question is, how do we use this money to backfill like public housing? You know, can we do that? And there's some. And the other question is, can we use this for hotels? You know, it's not like a house, but it is. We're providing services for people where they live. You know, can we do this? For example, the things that are being talked about. We have people in mobile homes that are not in terrible shape. Could we basically do have the landlord raise the rent for a while, and in exchange for weatherization, or in exchange for you know, paying more for people to move to mobile homes? How creative can we be? Now, there's going to be changes in Washington about it, but you have to remember that other states that are getting 1/5 of what we got don't have the same demand for creativity. They can probably spend this to meet renter needs right away. And so if Vermont, we don't have a national outcry to be as creative. It's more of for people like us who've gotten way more than our share. And so but the thing is, every time you push on that, you have Guidehouse and the administration trying to say, how far are we over the line of creativity? And even the housing advocates would probably say, this is for rental housing. What are you doing using this money for mobile homes or for hotels vouchers? So it's going to be a discussion. You know, there's going to be, you have time. Time is not on our side. You want to get the money out sooner. You got to decide how much risk you're going to take and how creative you can be. And this is going to be great fun for Senate Economic Development and other committees on how we do this. And my hope is that the administration and the legislature and the advocates sort of think it through. And the other important issue is, if it looks like we can't spend 200 million, then maybe we should be really creative with the extra money. But this is an area where we're going to be most, I would say that it's really getting a lot of attention and focus because it's just so much money.
Well, I work for a public housing authority in my off time, and I can tell you the rental assistance need out there, it was severe before the pandemic hit. And I also work with a mobile home park here that is in dire need.
Yeah.
I mean, and they charge rent. They charge rent. They charge rent for the plots.
Yeah.
So they're paying rent. I guess I don't understand how we can't be creative enough to spend that money on something that is such a dire need.
We need a waiver. We're going to need the feds to let us know to waive it and let us use it creatively. That's, I think, our challenge, because we could use it for students, for dorm rentals. We could use it for mobile home parks. We could use it.
Well, mobile home parks is rental.
Well, so are renting dorm rooms.
So there is in the issue brief, if you get down to line 6, you'll see you can click on the rental assistance and it'll show you some of the guidelines and some of the complexities of this. And the other thing is that, you know, it's not going to be everything where everybody's in agreement, because if you're an advocate for rental assistance, you may not be an advocate of putting the money into into shelters or things like that. Or it's all, I mean, there's a lot to figure out and a lot of interest here. And you're asking the right questions. And I think what happened last fall in some of the housing programs is legislative leadership said to the administration, this is an area we want to take risks. It's a really part of state policy. It's a direction we need to go. Let's do it. And then they worked that out with the administration. And this may be the same type of area where somebody has to assess the risk we're taking and say, let's go for it. With the idea being that if we don't have enough, if something goes wrong and somebody says that's really a bad use, then we might have to pay it off with other resources. So those are the types of questions. The other question comes in, there's no money in this for bricks and mortar. So, one of the things that, like you said, if we could somehow recapture some of that CRF money that went out in the rental housing system before and pull it back, maybe that could be put in for the bricks and mortar component over the next year, because it could be spent. Now we have a whole another year to spend it, and marry it to the renter assistance. So there's tons of room for creativity. Lots of people are going to have to think about it. It'll amuse a whole bunch of advocates and committee members in different committees over the next few months.
I think amuse is an interesting term to
Well, I
me.
shouldn't say that. I should say it will occupy them. I'm trying to be careful with what I say, and I'm not very good at that. Okay, so I'm not going to talk much about the Center for Disease Control Prevention, because you heard about that. 8 million for vaccines, 36 million in testing. There may be more money there. I think that Doug rightly said, I mean, we probably should get more money. But that's where it is now. The elementary, secondary school relief, we're supposed to get $127 million. Some of that goes to private schools. Some of it goes to governor's fund. I think the private school amount is, how does it work? Let me think. I have it here.
How does it work legally?
Yeah, so
private
school. 3.9 million goes to the governor to distribute. 12 million or so goes to the private schools. But it's actually interesting. What they've done is they said private schools can apply for money to cover COVID expenses. If they don't need it, then it goes to the other, it can be used for other school needs. So it's a little bit unclear, how much they'll actually use and the application process, and how do you maybe it doesn't have to be that extensive an application. Maybe it can be really restrictive. There's a lot of uncertainty there. But we also have 117 or so million left over that's going to go out to schools. And the conditions of going out to schools is fairly open. I mean, it can be, the languages can be used for mental health. It can be used for PCBs or, environmental stuff. And so there's going to be a lot of discretion there, coupled with the fact that the new revenue forecast that's going to be on next Tuesday has a tremendous upgrade, or I shouldn't say tremendous. It has a substantial upgrade to the education fund. So your problems of there'd be enough money just on the revenue side alone to eliminate this deficit in the ed fund and to bring the tax growth down to flat to where it was last year. So you can have that, plus you have all this money coming in this bill, and then the new bill may have even more money. So, you're going to have to assess, and there's also 13 or 14 million sitting of CRF money to be spent on education. It goes back to this question of how do we determine whether we want to use that CRF for something else that didn't get a lot of money? Like there was no money in there for bricks and mortar for schools. There's not a lot of broadband assistance, and it's just there's sort of the question of another bite of the apple. The world's changed.
Is there any way that I know that the local government expense reimbursement program was $10 million, which was very minuscule for their needs. Is there any way of putting any of this into that?
Well, that's the question. If we can find a way to bring back CRF money, you'll have to choose what you do with it. But the other catch is the new bill, the one that Biden's talking about, and we don't know what that'll happen with that. But his initial proposal is $350 million in state and local assistance, and whether that survives, I mean, I've heard numbers like 100 billion. I mean, 350 billion to 100 billion. Well, we have a silly formula here that if we were just getting, Vermont is 1.0 how does it work? 0.187%, or just about 0.2% of the US population. We're very small. But if you take a number like 350 billion, that's 3.5 billion would be 1%. And so 0.2% would be in the neighborhood of $700 million. So that's a lot of money if that came in for state and local assistance. So I don't know and we often get more than that, like because of the small state minimums. So the range, and even if that were to be reduced down to 100 billion, it still could be a big number. So there's just and this comes around thinking it costs us a state and local. So sometimes that money comes with restrictions saying you have to make sure a certain amount of money goes out to local cities and towns. And this is going to be a really interesting question for you people, is just how do we meet the needs of local towns when we have these resources? We didn't do a lot in the VLCT. We sort of did what we did. I'm sorry, in the first CRF, we did a fair amount, but most of our local money went to schools, and in assistance to schools, pretty substantial dollars went there. We may decide, given the money that's going directly to schools next time, that if we do get flexible money, that we use it for some of the things you're talking about. And so that'll be another decision that you're all going to have to deal with soon. The higher education one, just to flag, if the state colleges got 12 million, some of that went to students and for student aid. Some of it is available to help defray the state college cost, which is, as you know, the future of the state colleges is being considered, and the number they're talking about is as much as $40 million of need. So even if we get 10 million of this for that helps us with building that bridge for the next year. So that'll be something that we all, and I think that the administration will probably in their budget provide some resource for state colleges. Mental health, there's money, and the other thing on the education thing, before I leave it, the 127 million, it says for mental health, it doesn't say for mental health in schools. There's room to play, we have these committee structures, and then we have these money that comes in that doesn't fit our committee structure. So we're going to have to figure that out. It's and we have this world in education and AHS where a lot of school expenses are really mental health expenses. And, should it be covered by AHS or should it be covered by education? And there's a lot of overlap. And so that will give us more interesting issues for people to think about and consider. There's money for congregate housing. There's children and family assistance and substance abuse. And Vermont received 82 million in transportation funding. And that's going to come through normal channels. So that'll just be right through the Transportation Committee. And there's a lot of other sources. There was a small broadband program to provide supplements to people to pay for broadband if they didn't have the money, like $50 a month. One of the concerns that came up in Senate Finance yesterday was, okay, if we start a federal program where we're giving people $50 a month to get broadband and that program ends, then what happens? Do we pick that up? Is that going to be a problem? And then coming back to this larger issue of, we got $5 billion in the first bill. A lot of that went out in December, and we're getting this $2 billion plus in the second bill. This is doing an amazing number on revenues. And so what you're going to see next week is not just the education fund, but the general fund and the transportation fund are going to be up in revenues pretty dramatically. But it's not forever. It's going to affect FY21 and probably FY22. And then you'll be back to the old alligator's mouth opening up where expenses are higher than revenues. And so when you think about resource allocation, you're going to, the types of things you want to think about, and this is related to your committee's work, and the administration is thinking about this too. Is this a time where we invest in technology? Is this a time where we really sort of try to build a system that's more functional? So when the 2 years of magical resources runs out, we have a stronger system. And also, and maybe this is another question that sort of is in your area, as far as the administration of government, what do we learn from the pandemic? Where are we weak? Where are our systems not really adequate? And I know that the leadership have been talking about this too. And then what does that mean for how do we build our system differently? How do we change it so that we can, and because we do have money now for the next couple of years to invest in change. And but we know that the future is not, this is not permanent money. This is sort of temporary money. It's also the same type of thing that we have and I think pensions are in your area too down the road. You know, we're at a really tough time with our pension system. And, you know, to bring about some of the long-term changes, we're gonna have to make a lot of tough choices. Can some of this money be used to be one part of a larger deal that, you know, really works on the pension system? So there's lots of, so I'm a budget guy, so I hate to have all my money spent in building permanent liabilities. I like to spend it on building a better system for the future. But if you guys spend it and build a base, then it really ruins my life because I have to go out and find a way to keep that base going. So so I'm just saying, use it creatively to build a more effective government. And that's going to be a push that I think you're going to hear a lot about and have to decide on. You know, the new bill, as you saw, probably has a lot of money they're talking about for childcare. We didn't get any additional money in this bill. That we have a little bit for children and families, but not a chunk. And you know, if you were to think of the big issues where, you know, we have the pensions, the housing, you know, childcare is one of those areas where we really do a terrible job. You know, we just aren't even funding even our own state law requirements. So I don't know. It's complicated. I'll try not to be totally crazy. Okay.
I think Senator Clarkson, Steve, I think
uh,
Senator Clarkson had a
yeah.
question.
I have to add crazy to your quote. I already have your best quote of the day being, it's complicated, confusing, and messy.
Yeah, right.
But oh my God, and now I've just lost the thought. Oh, you know, in a way, we ought to treat it all like one-time money. And one-time money can be used for long-term solutions, like the way we're using it in housing and building housing, which and rehabbing housing in the Rutland area, the housing improvement program. I mean, that's all using this one-time money for long-term solutions, which is in some ways the way we have to look at these. You're absolutely right. If we just set up more programs with them, but if we can fund the programs we already have and or fund long-term solutions, which will help us, because all this money we're going to have to pay for over time. So
and the other thing is, and just to add to that complication, these are all things you can learn about. We have Chris Roop on our staff has a really good thing on the pension funds, you know, background of what's going on in that. We have Joyce Manchester has just done an issue brief pointing out that right now 73% of our unemployed are women, and this is not a traditional phenomenon. Historically, this time of year, there are more men that are unemployed, construction and, you know, people like that are out of work. But we are in a totally different arena. So you're saying to yourself, this pandemic has affected different groups in different ways. So, you know, when you're thinking, and the administration is, and I'm like a really biased person. I know I'm a nonpartisan, but okay. But so there's issues that came up in the Joint Fiscal Committee. When you give money to businesses, how targeted do you want to be? I mean, I think you really need to think about, you know, what is the problem we're facing? We're not in the situation we were with Joint Fiscal where it was crisis A. We have more money coming in from the feds and business assistance. Right now, we don't have that huge amount of resources, but how much do you all want to target your resources to the types of economic change we're seeing? And you know, whether it's a child care issue, whether it's a type of businesses where women work, the hospitality industry, the other things, the businesses that are, the people that have businesses you can do to work from home are different than the ones that, you know, some people can have childcare issues and working from home is possible, but some people can't work from home in their jobs and have had to give them up. So it's a very complex piece. And I know economic development's going to have to deal with this, that committee, but it's really a larger, I mean, the systems we build, you're in the world of systems, you're in the world of how government's structured. That's really, it's a real important review. And maybe the thing to do with your agencies for this committee is to talk to them about, you know, what do they find out about our systems? Where are we weak? Where are we strong? How do we build them? So we, you know, where are our vulnerabilities? So that's just a thought. And what we're looking at, wherever possible, and this is the point that the chair was making earlier, to look at how do we sort of recapture the CRF money, which is flexible, and you can do things like what Senator Clarkson talked about, maybe for more housing and things like that, by using some of this new resources. Now, are there cases where we can move money around. And that's going to, and you know, the question is, again, this issue of risk. You know, do you use the money creatively to take risks? And it just means that we need to be ready to have some reserves in case somebody comes down later on and says, you shouldn't have done that.
Okay. So any questions for us? I think our work is just beginning.
It is.
Mhm.
And this isn't even without the overlay of all the stuff that will get passed from Biden. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the other piece, is that we have this huge freight train of opportunity plowing its way down a track. It's not going to be what was proposed last night. It won't end up that way, obviously. But
Mhm.
man, there's hope for states and municipalities just steamrolling down. And oh, that's going to be another
Yeah.
whole piece of work for us, which is going to be big.
I think Steve's suggestion is kind of where I'd been thinking, is that we need to talk to the agencies and the departments and find out what they learned, where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are, what they see as needing to be changed, regardless of what we think we might get in money.
Yeah, I
Some of
agree.
those changes will be able to be made to strengthen the systems without necessarily spending money. So we need to, and then we need to be ready to make suggestions when we know what money there will be. But we need to start talking to them now about where they see changes that can be made. And I'll work with the other chairs to see how they want to, how we want to split up this responsibility in terms of different agencies and departments.
And you know, you're absolutely right, Jeanette and Steve. I think that if we also, you know, this is just building out our lessons learned. And, you know, for example, it would be great if the LCT came to us with all their proposals for how town work. I mean, we know a few little tiny pieces of it, like the deeds, you know, the digitizing of land records and stuff. But there must be oodles of things they've learned that we could make more efficient and do. So I think it's a great idea to do for all of our areas of jurisdiction and each agency.
So Senator Rahm?
I don't know if this is a sort of taboo subject in this committee.
None are.
Good. And how recently it's come up. But I just, maybe it's a question for Doug. I can't imagine doing any of this without a centralized budget and planning office. And he's a COO of a sort of really disparate set of agencies. And I just think it's time to bring back a planning office. It feels like every other state has one, and they collect data and they coordinate these kinds of efforts. And where are we with that?
Doug has disappeared.
I can respond if you'd like, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
So I would say that at this point, I haven't had a lot of conversations with the rest of the administration about that type of concept. I just moved into my role from tax in November. So I think I can bring that back. You know, I can certainly bring the message back that it's a conversation that the committee would like to have, but I don't have a lot that I could really chime in on right now.
Of course, we used to have a planning office years ago, up until the end of the Cunin administration. No, up until Howard Dean's administration, I think. Howard Dean decided we didn't need to do that kind of planning, so he eliminated the planning office.
And just to add fuel to that fire, in some ways, like education, you know, the question is, we just act like the education department operates like a pass-through entity. It just gives money out. There's no real, I think they really aren't very good at thinking about strategically, you know, what are we doing? And I feel like in some ways, a lot of it, that is a really critical need in that area. It's a critical need everywhere. One example where this is going to come up, and it's in the healthcare arena, is that we currently have two major waivers that are being renegotiated with Washington. One is the Global Commitment Waiver, and one is the ACO waiver, and they tremendous impact in Vermont. Well, we were negotiating with Trump people up until recently, and now they're going to have a whole new collection of Biden people, and it's an ongoing process. But we know that Biden's talked about public options. Biden's talked about maybe lowering the age which Medicare pays down to 60. And so one of the questions is, how do we look at that and say, what can Vermont do to sort of be a leader in sort of those types of policy areas? And how do we take advantage of the new administration, maybe be a test case for those things? So a lot of what Senator Rahm and Senator Polina just pointed out is and we have the need to think big about in a lot of policy areas, and to think about not just now, but sort of how do we work this situation? We also have one of the most phenomenal things ever in my mind, which is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee is Senator Leahy. The chair of the Senate Budget Committee is Senator Sanders. And so we have probably one of the most powerful delegations we've ever had. And so, if there's ever a time for us to be thinking big about in a lot of different policy areas, this is it. And it really does require work with the administration and the legislature to do that. And so, yeah.
Great question, Keisha.
It's the benefit of being new, just sort of throwing it out there.
Well, I believe that when I was first on this committee was when Governor Dean had stopped using the planning council. I think it was called council. And then Governor Douglas came in when I came in, and he said that since it wasn't ever being used anymore, we should just eliminate it. So that was done. Now, maybe we should have that conversation again with the administration, and we could have Doug and Suzanne and different people come in and talk to us about the wisdom of something like that. I think we can do that.
If I may, I've been pulling together examples from other states, and it just feels generally like we folded ours as other states started folding more work into theirs. They really made them professional clearinghouses for studies and data and reports, and their best thinking and trends to go back out to all their agencies. And there's states that have really good examples that we might be able to draw from and talk to folks in other places.
So Senator Collmore, maybe we could put that under a heading of a conversation around the Government Accountability Committee.
Yeah.
And just one more policy area, which is going to be coming up, and it really fits in your committee thing. And we've been thinking a lot because the legislature has basically taken through legislation a lot of space in the executive branch to cover our potential needs in the future. But the whole question about space usage and this has been, they say in the IT world, in the legislative world, and in our world, in the state world, the amount of remote work that's being done now is so different than what was done in 6 months ago or a year ago. And so what does this mean about, how does it affect the sort of state space usage? And I've always, one of the things I do think we need to think about how do we need as a legislative body 5 years, thinking about 5 years from now, where do we want to be? And that's an area which in your committee also deals with, is just the resource that we have for fiscal plan. How has that been affected by the pandemic?
Well, we don't want to be here in 5 years.
No.
Yeah.
We do not want to be meeting remotely in
Right.
5 weeks even, but
some of the committee rooms are really tight. And, is there going to be an issue about over time, do we want to create a situation where not every committee meets and is quite as close quarters as they are today? Maybe it'll just be fine. We'll go back to exactly how we were.
maybe we should revive the proposal that was put forth by the committee that Judy Livingston headed. When the first year that I was in 2003, there was a really beautiful rendition done of what the State House could.
Oh, I remember seeing that. Yeah.
It was beautiful.
It was really, really nice.
Mhm.
We'll ask David Sheets to come in, and maybe we'll meet with institutions and have David Sheets come in and explain it to us. Okay, anything else, committee?
I'm drained.
So
It's
So we-
Friday.
we do have, we sent out in,
You're muted. You muted yourself.
Yeah, how did you mute right in the middle of a sentence?
I have no idea. I think Gail is playing tricks on me. I guess I touched something. Anyway, we did send out invitations to DPS and VLCT and EMS to join us today. I hesitate to, mainly, I think, to listen to what the overviews were. And then the thought is that we will then get into the individual areas and needs and what's presented to us. So I apologize if Rick and Gwen and Drew have been sitting there, but I bet they've also been doing their email and paying their bills and whatever else one does when they're being bored. And you can't do that when we're in person, right? It's harder for you to be doing that. So,
And Madam Chair, it's been helpful to get feedback about our marching orders. So if you want VLC to go out and start surveying, I mean, we have a lot of information about what a wish list. And I'm glad that Senator Ron brought up the Elgar grants. That's been a big topic of discussion. So no, it's been helpful to listen because we have a lot of stuff to put together, but in a short period of time, it's probably best to hold off.
yeah, and I know that, I think that what we're going to hear, I think we have scheduled next week, we have EMS scheduled to come in and tell us what worked, what didn't work, what the needs are going forward. And I would suggest that and the same thing, we are not scheduling DPS next week at all because we know you're very busy with other things next week and we want to leave you alone. So we'll get there the week after that. But when people are thinking about this, think about kind of what worked, what didn't work. And what Steve was talking about is what are the things that we learned that systemically could be changed so that we can make more permanent changes so we don't find ourselves kind of struggling and grappling every time something comes up, and how can we be more effective and efficient by making systemic changes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Drew is here too.
Yes, I said Drew.
Oh, okay, but I mean, he's,
Yes, we have him scheduled for next week to go into detail for us. But if any of the three of you wanted to say anything right now, please do so. Drew?
I guess this committee should know by now, Madam Chair, that I will always speak about something.
I know.
Given the opportunity. So just a very quick overview, since we'll be in again to give you greater detail. As you can imagine, during the public health crisis, EMS has been a pretty happening place. A lot like your committee, and when you're talking about your areas of jurisdiction, ours is kind of passed all over the place, from vaccination to transportation to testing, and obviously our main role, which would be emergency medicine. So from an EMS perspective, it's been a crazy year, and certainly it's pushed our kind of realm of possibilities in the way that we serve the public and the communities to completely new levels. Right now, we're working with the health department on a mass vaccination plan that we'll be rolling out pretty soon. I'm excited about the opportunity to help kind of bring an end to this pandemic through vaccination and using our EMS staff to do that. We also have had the opportunity to learn about a lot of or more specifics about how fragile our system really is. And early on in the pandemic, we discussed the funding mechanism that keeps EMS moving, and how easy it was to disrupt that funding mechanism and put many services in jeopardy of being able to continue to serve the public. We also saw our entire workforce development framework crumble in early spring. And, we did use some money that you appropriated and trying to help rebuild that structure. We tried to not only kind of get that program off the ground and put a Band-Aid on our losses, but also to kind of build that future programming. So we've learned a lot of lessons in EMS over the summer and the fall. And we certainly have a lot of work to do. We are way behind in our workforce development. We have managed to get about 30% of the people that we need into EMS programs, utilizing some of the education funds or utilizing all of the education funds. But we need to kind of focus our energy on kind of rebuilding that workforce in 2021. And I completely agree with the concept of utilizing what resources are available to build a sustainable model. For many years, I've spoken with this committee about challenges facing EMS, and they were here before the pandemic. And it'd be nice if we could kind of chip away at some of those challenges for the long term as we bring an end to the pandemic.
Yes, thank you. And we'll go into much more detail next week when we hear from you, but that's a good overview. Thank you for reminding us. Rick, did you have anything you'd like to throw in here? I can't hear you. You seem to be unmuted, but.
Hey.
Try unmuting yourself again.
It may be the volume on your computer.
This is some kind of a gag order, I think.
Or maybe it's,
While he's working on that, Madam Chair, I mentioned I have a kind of emotionally sensitive meeting at 3, if it's okay.
Yeah.
A little early.
Well, yeah, I want to wrap up here in just a minute, but I just wanted to give Rick a moment if he had anything to say.
He's good.
So what I'm going to say, committee, then is that thank you to everybody for coming, and thanks to Doug and Steve for those uplifting reports. Next week, we will be looking at the opt-in, opt-out issue for towns for the marijuana bill. We are going to hear from Jason and Tom Little around the census and what that means. Just a report on where we are with that. We're going to listen to OPR's priorities and what some of their issues are. We're going to hear from Susanna Davis and the Racial Equity Advisory Panel, their report, and then the RDAP. And I can't ever remember what RDAP stands for, but Eitan is joining us to give us that report. And then we'll have a general discussion about data collection and how we work all of those things together. We are going to hear from the National Guard. They have some major concerns about the safety, the COVID, the virus safety with their members who are being deployed, and how we need to treat them. We're going to hear on our preparedness bill, and then EMS, and then on Friday we're going to spend the day again looking at the issue of the Public Records Act and the juveniles.
wow. That's a great week.
So that's next week. And okay. And then on, I'm going to leave a little time on Tuesday for some committee discussion about what we might want to do the next week. Okay. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You too. Enjoy.